There are 18 so-called climate independents standing in this election. They're part of the very rich Climate 200 group of multimillionaire and heir of a tycoon, Simon Holmes a Court. Now, they claim to be independents, but they all have the same climate policies. They were all vetted by Holmes a Court. They all get his group's training and his campaign help, and they all run against Liberals, and none will say which side they'd back, Labor or Liberal, in a hung parliament. So, smells like a party, acts like a party. I think it's a party. There is something else, though. Some also seem to attract people who don't actually like Israel much. For instance, Allegra Spender, the candidate in Wentworth, was first recruited by a group called Wentworth Independents, which listed as 4 core members a climate activist called Blair Palisi, who says she also did policy work for Spender. But she's also known for calling for a boycott of Israel, which is called an apartheid state. And she's attacked Australia for what she claims is its shocking support of Israel in killing unarmed children and civilians. Well, Allegra Spender says she herself does not support a boycott of Israel. Palisi is not actually a member of her campaign. OK. But then there's another climate independent, Zoe Daniel, former ABC reporter, running against the Liberals in Goldstein. As an ABC reporter, she last year signed an anti-Israel petition back when Israel was being attacked by rockets fired by Hamas terrorists. And she signed a petition referring to Israel as an apartheid state and calling on editors to avoid treating both sides in the war as equal and to instead treat the Palestinians as victims and the Israelis as the instigators, and to allow their journalists to publicly be on the Palestinian side. Well, now that Zoe Daniel is actually running in a seat with a fair few Jewish voters, she told a Jewish group that now she really wanted to know more, wanted to learn from this. She wanted to learn from this. And really, she said she'd just signed this petition to show her profound concern for the safety and welfare of journalists. Well, joining me is Dr. David Adler, head of the Australian Jewish Association. David, thanks for your time. Thanks for coming on again. Do you buy Zoe Daniel's excuse?
Andrew, absolutely not. It's almost like there's a ticker box system here. And imagine our shock when we find that amongst a green leftist movement, there is also anti-Israel sentiment. And Zoe Daniels actually has a longer track record. As an ABC journalist, she's written a number of articles that are critical of Israel. One that we came across as part of our research was when President Trump announced that he would recognise Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and move the US embassy. Zoe Daniel, in her article, attributed his motivation, at least in part, to, quote, satisfying his wealthy Jewish donors. Now, that's not a criticism of Israel, and I'm not here today accusing anyone specifically of being an anti-Semite, but that is very close to a classic anti-Semitic trope. So someone with that track record, I think the voters of Goldstein, and particularly the Jewish voters of Goldstein, have to ask a question whether somebody with that track record is a fit and proper person to represent the area. We think it's highly problematic.
Well, I haven't donated $1 to Donald Trump's campaign, and I'm not Jewish, but I thought what he did in terms of Israel and getting peace deals organised between Israel and some of the Gulf states was brilliant. There's another example of what we're talking about. GetUp is another cashed-up activist group that's helping global warming candidates in this election. One of GetUp's board members in 2016 also wanted a boycott of Israel, that apartheid state. Is this a pattern or just a coincidence?
Andrew, there's a bigger picture here, and I'd like to reveal on your program that there are 2 highly problematic, influential institutions in Australia. You might have heard of the important definition of anti-Semitism called the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition. 2 organisations that have actively rejected that definition are the Australian Greens perhaps no surprise, but also the ABC. As far as we know, they're the only significant politically active institutions to have done so. And there is an argument that if you look at that big picture, that the Greens and the ABC have adopted a position which is technically institutionally anti-Semitic. So this is a pattern. You're absolutely right. It's a dangerous pattern. It's a broad pattern, particularly when in Australia, which has had a reasonably positive record, and both the Liberal Party and the Labor Party federally have said that they do support that particular definition of anti-Semitism. We have the Greens and the ABC who have rejected it. It's a big deal, and frankly, earlier on in the program you were talking about the lack of reform of the ABC by the coalition government over the last 9 years. Let me say they now have another challenge of urgent reform needed within the ABC as well.
Absolutely. David, absolutely. And if people wonder why the left has got such a set against Israel, figure it out. Western culture, rich, capitalist, successful, individualist. What do you know? Exactly everything that the left, the hard left, hate. David Adler, thank you for your time.